Hello, welcome to today's webinar, Modeling a Car with T-Splines 3 for Rhino. This is part one of a three-part webinar series. In fact, it's the second time we've done part one. We did it last week and the recording didn't work, so this is bonus. Part two will be tomorrow on September 8th, and part three will be September 13th. If you have not yet registered for parts 2 and 3, you can do so at T-Splines.com. I am Matt Cederberg, CEO of T-Splines Inc., and I'll be hosting today's webinar. Kyle Houchens, a T-Splines user and the owner of the Outside Digital Art and Design Consultancy, will be doing the car modeling demo today. He will be using T-Splines version 3.1 for Rhino and Rhino 4. The purpose of this webinar series is to show how you can use T-Splines to model a car. The focus will be on theory. Since T-Splines is still a relatively new surface type, the biggest barrier to success we have found is that the designers are used to approaching problems in a very different way using NURBS, which is the technology used in all other mainstream CAD software. T-Splines can help you create a very nice model in a short amount of time, but it requires a new way of thinking about modeling. Today we'll show you one of the simplest ways to use T-Splines to get good results in a production environment. We hope that seeing an entire car modeled with T-Splines will be helpful for you in your next project, whatever industry you are in. The agenda for today's webinar is as follows. Kyle will first discuss the overall strategy he will use to create this car model. Then he'll start off and create a boxy car model by laying out patches and bridging between them. Next, he'll fine-tune and tweak the highlights of the model. This is where T-Splines really shines. Then Kyle will create the bumpers. This will be helped by a short technical discussion on key T-Splines vertex types, star points and T-points. Kyle will then complete the car over the next two webinars, and we'll be saving some time at the end of this webinar for some audible Q&A questions and answers. So I don't know if this seems like a lot, but as you're aware, modeling an entire car, even just a concept car, is not a trivial exercise. I think you'll agree that even just after today's 90-minute session, there's no comparison between how quickly you can do this car modeling in T-Splines and how long it would take you to do it in NURBS. Again, our hope is that by seeing this exercise, you'll get ideas about how T-Splines can help you in your particular industry. So finally, before passing the mic over to Kyle, just a few housekeeping points. We're aware that 90 minutes is a significant amount of time, so we'll try our best to make this time well spent today. We are very interested in engaging with you during the webinar, so please use the chat box in the GoToWebinar panel liberally. We have a team here to answer your questions throughout the webinar. Our best webinars are when we have a continual back-channel discussion going on with the attendees to augment what the presenter is showing. So if you have any questions at all about which button Kyle pressed, what command he's using, why he's doing what he's doing, please just type those in and we can answer those without interrupting his flow. Also, we'll be sending out tweets during the webinar, and if you're on Twitter, we'd encourage you to do the same. So we are at T-Splines, or you can also use the T-Splines hashtag. Also, I'll be interrupting Kyle at various points with some in-webinar quizzes because we want to give you the chance to have everything sink in as much as possible. And finally, if you can't stay until the end, this webinar will be recorded. So with that, let me introduce Kyle. Kyle Houchens is the owner of the Outside Digital Art and Design. He studied car design at the College of Creative Studies in Detroit, and then he went to work actually in the toy industry and has modeled over 1,000 automotive models for the toy and entertainment industries. So let me go ahead and actually before we turn the time over to Kyle, let me just launch our first poll to help us get a better understanding of kind of who's watching today. And the question is, have you modeled a car before using CAD software? So if you could just respond to that poll, whether you've modeled the car for fun, for a paying job, or if you have not modeled a car at all, then that will just give us a better sense of who's actually here on the webinar today. So leave that poll open a few more seconds and then go ahead and close that. And we'll share those results in just a minute, but first let me turn the time over to Kyle.
Hello, everybody. Thanks for coming. This is kind of a redo on last week. As Matt mentioned, we had a technical issue with the recording last week, and only the upper left-hand corner of my screen recorded while we were doing this. So we're going to just basically cover the material that we covered last week, and then we're going to go to step 2 tomorrow, which is the 8th. So if you joined us last week, this is going to be a rehash. If you missed us last week, you get to see this all again. And so let's go ahead and just jump in here. This is what we're going to build, and basically it's, you know, a basic sedan-shaped car, and I tried to throw as many kind of ridiculous go-fast doodads on this thing as possible so that we'd have all sorts of opportunities to discuss how you would do some big, obnoxious rally car nose, sunken headlights, bumped up hoods, and all the kind of stuff that you would, kind of worst case scenario modeling situations that you would have to deal with, knowing of course that this is not going to be the end all do all of automotive design. I was kind of trying to throw every worst case scenario modeling project at this thing to show how taken to the extreme T-Splines functions really quite brilliantly within this environment. I've been using T-Splines for a couple of years now, and as Matt mentioned, I've modeled several hundred, actually closer to 1,000 automotive models over the past 19 years that I've been doing this, and I always worked in NURBS and have recently been transitioning more and more into T-Splines, and over the last couple of months there's been requests to do automotive webinar, and so I figured it was a good enough time as any to jump in and really take a look at how to do this effectively.
Kyle, before you get too far in, I just wanted to, these were very surprising results with this poll that we just ran. I just wanted to share these. Looks like most of the people here have never actually modeled the car, and 10% have actually done it for a paying job. So the interesting point here is if you could, with the jargon, explain the different parts of the cars you're modeling. I think that will help
Sure.
everyone out. So
Absolutely. A couple of the difficult areas to model in cars are getting a good highlight transition from the fender flare area into the body side, making this highlight peel predictably and attractively off the fender flare area here into the body side to create this shoulder highlight is something that, you know, consumes a considerable amount of time, and there's people who essentially specialize in Class A modeling, you know, these particular aspects of the car. The other one that, and let me shut the ISO curves off here real quick so we can look at this without any distraction. So basically, getting the shoulder highlight to track through the car is very difficult in NURBS, and also this A pillar, which is the front pillar that encloses the windshield, and the C pillar, which encloses the rear glass and flows into the trunk lid. There's a highlight line here that also is a very difficult highlight line to get to work in NURBS, because this is typically a situation where when you're doing Class A modeling, this is where the zebra display would break down, which is where you would use a black and white striped shader to show how that transitions from one thing into the other. And if we look at this here, let me get this. You'll notice that in this area now I've got my mesh turned down. Let me turn my mesh up a little bit. That we're getting really nice zebra transitions in and out of here. This is what you want. This is a smiley face Class A modeling situation here, where you get really nice highlight lines running in and out of your transitions. And again, my mesh is a little janky, which is why you're seeing the lines. But you're noticing here that they're unbroken and nice and smooth and transitioning from one surface into the other. That's what you're looking for there. Especially this one, this nice little Z highlight right through here, is something that, you know, essentially any car that's got this type of pillar situation, you're going to get this highlight back in here, and getting that to track cleanly from one surface into the next is an area of considerable issue. In T-Splines, one of the coolest things that I've found about doing cars is in NURBS, you're laying out big patches, and so essentially you'd lay out this whole body side, you'd lay out the nose, you'd trim out some holes, and then you'd lay out a hood, and then you'd trim that all out, and then you'd spend all the rest of your time trying to blend these things together so that you get that nice clean tracking zebra highlight through there. And if there was any change to the model, which there always is, there's always some marketing guys going to come in and say that, you know, it needs to, you know, you need to be able to fit 7 baby seats in the back of a sports car, then you'd have to go back and model, which means you'd have to tear it all apart, which means all the transitions that you built would all be lost. You'd have to throw all those away, rechain, you know, go back and modify all of your primary surfaces, and then go back and reblend. And that takes considerable amount of time, because every time you tear the model apart and make a change, and there's a considerable amount of rework in order to do that. With the T-Splines workflow, one of the coolest things about that is first of all, you're doing kind of the same thing. You're laying out big, broad patches, and you're knitting them together. The cool thing is, once you knit them together, they're one unified surface. And so if you make a modification to, say, a primary surface, your transitionary surfaces, all your blend surfaces, update as a seamless part of the complete model. So essentially, it's like grabbing a big chunk of clay and moving the clay around, and all the transitions happen with you. So a modification in T-Splines is a situation where you're grabbing it and you're moving it around, and you're making a modification that's taking minutes, as opposed to tearing apart a NURBS model, which can take days. So there's some significant benefits to working this way as far as shape exploration, and the upside is you're never more than a single button click away from being right back into a NURBS model. And we'll talk a little bit about workflow and how to leverage T-Splines and when to jump out of T-Splines back into NURBS, and how to manage all that stuff as we go.
So,
but that's basically kind of.
Oh, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Oh, yeah. I was just going to say, before you jump into kind of showing how we do this in T-Splines, I just want to run one more poll, and that is just asking how many projects each of the attendees have modeled in T-Splines, whether you've made over 10 models in T-Splines, between 2 and 9, just one project, or if you haven't used T-Splines before. So now as we get into kind of showing how this car is made, it'll be interesting to see that feedback. Go ahead and close this poll, and I'll go ahead and share that as well. So it looks like actually a decent number of the people here on the webinar are experienced T-Splines users, so that's
fantastic.
That'll be great. So okay, we'll look forward to your comments as we jump into modeling.
All right, well,
here.
Feel free to call out any mistakes you see me making along the way. So let's go ahead and get started with this. And this workflow is basically something that I developed with the thought being that I wanted this to be kind of the simplest way from point A to point B. It may not necessarily be the fastest, and we'll talk about ways to make what I'm doing more efficient as we go. But for the most part, this is essentially what I like to refer to as kind of the anvil, hammer and anvil, simplest approach to get yourself from one place to the other. And then, as you get more advanced and more comfortable with this, then we start talking about ways to improve this workflow. So the first thing I did was just a loose pencil sketch, and basically the idea behind this was to lay out the basic form, basic proportion, kind of the relationship between the wheels and the body side, the relationship between the cab and the body side, how much overhang, how much rear overhang. But you'll notice that in my in my front view and in my top view and in my rear view, I'm leaving a lot of these details really, really loose and really, really open. And one of the things that I find with T-Splines, and I find this almost every project I sit down with, is if I design the thing, if I spend the time up front and design the whole thing, start to finish, 4-view control drawings, everything lines up, everything's good to go, it's, ready to be thrown into CAD and have a, quote, CAD model made of it, you can do that. That's great. You can certainly take a sketch, copy it directly, match up all your line work and all that kind of stuff. But what I've actually found is, for me as a designer, taking my CAD operator hat off and going back into design world, which is where I was trained, was that if I just have a shorter conversation with myself at the beginning of the project to determine kind of what I'm going to make and about what things are going to look like and about what things are going to feel like, that I've actually been able to discover a lot of things in a design, getting into 3D, using the T-Splines tools, that I would not have discovered if I had overly defined it to start with. And let me explain that a little bit. When you're doing a NURBS model, obviously, there's a certain amount of work that goes into laying it out. There's a certain amount of work that goes into planning it, building your primary surfaces, building your transition surfaces, cutting, trimming, blending, all that kind of stuff. And the idea is that it's not a terribly flexible tool as far as changes in exploration are concerned. Now, certainly there's people out there who would argue that say that they're phenomenally fast NURBS modelers and they can do anything they want, and that's great. I don't dispute that. But what I would offer is that this particular type of modeling, being more of a sub-D surface modeling system, is infinitely more conducive to design exploration within the CAD modeling process. That I've found that 99% of the time when I sit down, if I look at the model that I came up with versus the input that I started with, the model's better than the input. Now, typically in a CAD workflow, the goal is, you got to keep design intent, you got to keep design intent, you got to keep design intent, and there's always a trade-off. You get to the end and you're like, okay, well, I had to give up on that, I had to give up on that, I had to give up on that, but it still looks pretty good. In my experience, a typical drawing NURBS workflow would result with, a certain amount of acceptance of compromise that allows you to say, okay, well, we ran out of time or we ran out of budget or whatever, and we just have to move on, and it's just going to have to look that way. Whereas T-Splines, I end up looking at stuff after I've done modeling it and think, that looked better than it started with, because it was so flexible and so easy to go in and explore forms that I actually end up with better models than I started with at the beginning of the design process. Does that make sense? It's basically allowed me to find stuff that I wouldn't necessarily have found in a 2D exploration and end up with a better result than I was originally intending. So what I've found is that I do much less upfront 2D pencil pushing and much more of my design decisions in 3D on the fly, where they make sense and where they actually promote a meaningful solution, as opposed to a great 2D sketch that may or may not actually have any basis in reality. So that's kind of how T-Splines has been changing the design side of my business. Now, I certainly have a considerable amount of people who just want me to build what they gave me, and that's fine. We can do that. But when it comes down to somebody wants me to explore a form, I'm finding T-Splines has been a really, really liberating piece of equipment. So let's look a little bit about how we're going to lay this out. And basically, anybody who's seen any of my other webinars knows I love what I call an append-face workflow. And that basically starts with a single square, and I extrude it out a bunch of times, and I push it and pull it around, and I make a flat paper doll, and then add some thickness to it and start pushing it around. We're going to do a similar type workflow with this particular car. And the idea being, if you had to build a car out of Post-it notes, all you had was square or relatively square, or at least let's agree that they're four-sided Post-it notes, and you had to build a car out of it, how would you do that? And so what I've done here, just to illustrate that, is I've laid out some basic curves. These are just curves. We're not going to use them to build anything, but I just wanted to illustrate how I would look at breaking this thing up and why I would break it up this way. And there's a couple of things in here that are obvious. If we're going to have an intake opening down here, we're going to need some extra detail here. The way the cabin has to come out, obviously there's got to be some detail here and there. And where this transition is going to branch off and where this transition is going to branch off, if you do this exercise and you just lay the thing out with curves, you can actually learn a lot about where you're going to put your patches, and then essentially from that point it's just a matter of copying the roadmap that you've laid out for yourself. One thing that I also did, you'll notice that I made sure that I left patches where the wheels were going to be. And in this case, there's just one single span. In this case, a transition from the hood necessitated the including another panel here, and that's okay. But I just want to make sure that my wheels are spaced where they should be spaced. What I wouldn't want is patches laid out like this, where I don't have detail where there is essentially going to be a hole. And so the way that this is laid out gives me, I can take these patches out and put a hole here. I can take these patches out and put a hole here. And so having this conversation with yourself where you just lay the thing out to start with, think about like if you just peeled off a sticky note and stuck it here and peeled off another, stuck it here, and peeled off another one and stuck it here. Make the whole model out of squares, and the model will essentially build itself. So let's take this layout and just go ahead and copy it. And what we're going to do is exactly what I said before. We're going to just start with the append face tool, and I'm just going to lay this out. I'm not really going to worry a whole lot about how precise I'm laying this out. I'm just going to start with a single square, and I'm going to go into edge mode, and I'm going to pick the single edge, and I'm going to just alt drag a face out. And for the purpose of this layout, I'm going to work in box mode by hitting the tab key. And you'll notice the difference between box mode and smooth mode is not very evident right here, but you'll notice that this isoparam right here jumps. And if it jumps, I know that I'm in smooth mode. If I move this and that isoparam moves, then I know I'm in smooth mode because it should stay put. So I'm going to hit the tab key, go into box mode, and then I'm going to alt drag out another one. I'm going to alt drag out another one. Just very quickly following the layout that I originally worked on. And I'm going to just adjust it real quick by grabbing some of these edges. And you'll notice that I'm skipping an edge because if I skip an edge, I get this edge to move for free. Little time saver. I'm going to grab this point down here, put that one where I want it. Up here, I'm going to grab a couple of these by shift clicking. I'm just going to drag those up. Again, I'm going to skip one because that one will move for free when I move this one. And then I'm going to drag this point. Switching to vert mode by hitting the A key or clicking up here through the heads-up display. And I'm going to just lay this out fairly closely, but again, I'm not going to get nutty about it because this is essentially liquid and can be changed extraordinarily easily. Now, one trick that I like when I'm doing this, say for instance I've placed a bunch of points, and I'm going to exaggerate this for the purpose of clarity. Say I have an inflection, no matter how big it is, in my side here, and I want to straighten this stuff out. What I can do is I can pick the inflected points here. I can hit the T key and snap to a point where I want these to straighten out with. And then I can use the scale by hitting the R key on the keyboard or clicking up here through the heads-up display and scale in 1D to that point. And you'll notice that those will straighten out. This one's in good shape, so I'm going to shut that one off. And then I'm going to snap back to here, and I'm going to just scale that up. And you'll notice what it allows you to do is to take points that are out of line and put them back where they're supposed to be. I'll use that a lot, and I'll talk about it every time I do it because it's a cool trick. I stole it from Juan, and I claim it as my own. Don't tell Juan, even though he's watching. Now, to lay out the bottom part, what we're going to do is I'm going to double-click this row of edges, and I'm just going to alt-drag that whole row down. because basically this is all lined up where it's supposed to be. I get a lot of that for free. I'm going to go into vert mode and just drag these around where they're supposed to be. Everybody with me so far? Am I losing anybody? I'm not going to worry about this stuff here just yet. I'm going to get the rest of the car laid out. I'm going to go back to edge mode again, double click to select my whole row, or I can pick one edge and hit the L key, which is the hotkey for edge loop. I'm going to alt drag this up again. And I'm aiming for my highest point here. And that way I can just pull this in. And you'll notice that I'm a little off here. I need some detail in here, but I'm not going to worry about that just yet, because essentially what's going to happen is I'm going to end up later pulling these surfaces off and adjusting this and then building a bumper, which we'll get to later. So for now, I'm going to aim the back end approximately where it's supposed to go. You can, if you've laid these curves out carefully, you can use the Rhino snaps and the move tool. If I pick a point, pick the move tool, I can snap from here to here. So you can lay these out super precisely if you want to, but I like to kind of wing it. Again, in the spirit of kind of exploring along the way, I like to kind of find a way along the way and just use this as a guide. Now, there's a transition here, and the way that this car is shaped, you'll notice from the top view there's a shoulder here, right? So there's got to be some wrap. In order to have some wrap, I'm going to need some detail. So I'm going to need a row of edges here that I can pull over in this view, in the side views, so that I get this wrap here. So in order to do that, I'm again going to just select that edge. I'll drag up. I'm going to slide these in a little bit. And again, wrangle points where they need to be. Really, really simple. If you can click and drag, this part of it will be no issue with you whatsoever. Paper dolls, flat paper dolls, like everybody, remember the cars you used to draw as a kid? And then you'd cut them out. Maybe I'm the only weird kid that did that, but I used to make little car lots of flat paper cutouts all the time there. That's why I like this workflow so much. All right. So now we're going to do the cabin. And in order to do the cabin, I'm just going to pick these here. I'm going to alt drag straight up. And again, I'm going to just move edge points and edges. And think about when you're laying your lines out, you want your points to be in a shape that makes sense with your form. For instance, I wouldn't want to build the windshield with an isoparam going this way. That would not be a wise placement here, because it's not flowing correctly. This has got a bend here, so I need something in here to bend. So I'm going to pull this one up here, pull this one up here. And if we go into perspective view, you can see that basically what we have, if I shut this image off, we just have a flat paper doll. Nothing special. Turn these back on. And now with this paper doll, what's going to happen is I'm going to pick this guy, and we're going to move it over to about here. We're going to mirror it, and then we're going to bridge between the two. Now, if I were just to bridge and have a 90-degree edge on the side of this thing, I would have a 90-degree edge, but the corner would be dictated by this point, and wherever the next point over here was, because, permit me to digress for just a second, T-Splines works just like a NURBS curve. So if I turn the points on here, if you imagine that these points are isoparams, or in this case they're points, if I pick a point on a NURBS curve and I move it here and I move it here, I get a sharper corner, right? So if this is a T-Splines, an edge T-Splines patch, and this is the edge of a T-Splines patch, my corner is going to be dictated by this point, and this point. So I need an edge here, and an edge here in order for the computer to be able to interpolate through that corner. If I pull this way out here and I pull this way out here, then I get a big broad curve. Same thing with T-splines. So what we're going to do, in order to give us that extra row of points there, I'm going to grab this edge, all of these external edges, and I'm going to add one more row up here, which is going to allow me to be able to bend the car a little more sharply at that point. Again, right back to what we were doing before. I'm going to leave this one straight up and down, actually. I like that one straight up and down. I'm going to adjust this a little bit here. Pull this one there. And in the spirit of not getting too nutty about this, I'm not going to go too much farther, and I'm just going to turn my image off because I've essentially established the proportions that I'm looking for, and I'm pretty happy with that. So I'm going to kind of free my mind from the confines of that sketch. By all means, if you need the sketch, go for it, but I find that some cool things can happen if you let go of the 2D world here for a second. All right, so let's take a look at this. Simple paper doll. I'm going to pick this, and I'm going to go to my top view. I'm going to just slide this over to match up with my top view. If I go back to perspective view, I just moved it over to about where it is. I'm going to shut this layout off because I don't need it anymore. And now we need to start bending this guy into shape. So we go back to top view. And cars are not dead straight. They're never, made like cut pieces of 2x4. They've always got a little bit of taper in the front, always got a little taper in the rear. And one of my favorite tricks is to use the UDT tools, the Universal Deformation tools within Rhino. If you don't have them or if you haven't used them, punch yourself in the face because they are the most awesome tools in the Rhino toolbox. Go ahead, I'll wait. If you go to the default McNeil toolbar, make sure that you go down all the way to the bottom. Make sure that the UDTs are turned on. These are probably the most powerful tools within the entire Rhino toolbox. What we're going to do is apply the bend to the points on this. Don't apply it to the faces or the edges because if you do, it'll convert this into a NURBS object. So make sure that you're in vert mode, select some verts, go to top view, and we're going to use the bend tool because it allows us to mathematically place the edges and know that they're all going to line up where they're supposed to be. If I can place these by hand, that's not a problem, but I run the risk, since I laid this out flat, I know these are all lined up perfectly. And if I place them by hand, I'm going to run the risk of introducing some inflection in here. Whereas if I bend them, Rhino's doing the math for me, and it's placing those on a nice, even arc.
So
and
Kyle, using that bend tool, that's one of the powerful aspects of using T-Splines inside of Rhino. Rhino has so many tools like this, and T-Splines ties into a lot of them. So realizing that your ability to model with T-Splines goes beyond just the T-Splines commands, and you can actually use a lot of those Rhino commands can really help you get to your final shape a lot faster.
Absolutely. I like to think of T-Splines as a 1,000 horsepower bolt-on nitrous and supercharger kit for Rhino. Rhino's already a really, really awesome car, and when you bolt T-Splines on top of it, the extra power that you have is just, absolutely awesome. I love that line in Aladdin. I have a young daughter, so I get to watch lots of Disney movies. There's a great line in Aladdin that says, "Awesome unlimited power, teeny tiny living space." That's pretty much Rhino and T-Splines. So let's look at this bend tool one more time because this is really I want the awesomeness of this to sink in on everyone. I can make a nice gentle bend like that, or I can make a really extreme bend like that, or I can make a couple of bends like that. And I know that they're all mathematically placed in relationship to each other. My favorite is just getting your top and bottom profile, and you just line that up with your curve by eyeball. And you get a really nice mathematical progression of how your body side is lined up. You can do the same thing to get your front and rear views. If I grab this whole row of stuff here, maybe get rid of this one, and bend from here down, I can do a nice roll under there. Is everybody appreciating how awesome this is? Because this is awesome. Because I can do this all day until everybody's happy. All right, so we've just used the bend tool to place all these points. We've introduced zero inflection to the model because they were all mathematically placed. And this thing is starting to take shape as a car. Now, this edge here needs to roll, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab this whole edge by double-clicking it, and I'm just going to pull it in a little bit. And you'll see that this is 1, 2, 3 points. As you can imagine, there's going to be a nice blend between there. In fact, I think if I toggle this smooth, no, too many creases. All right, so let's go ahead and join this up. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to switch into object mode, go into the top view, and I'm going to use the Rhino mirror command. And to think of T-Splines as a layer of glass laid on top of Rhino while you're modeling. If you see the heads-up display, or if you see the sidebar here, the sheet of glass is on. Rhino is looking for T-Splines commands. If you want to use a Rhino command, you have to take the T-Splines sheet of glass off. There's two ways to do that. You can hit the Control spacebar, temporarily shutting T-Splines off. You can hit the backslash key, which on my keyboard is on the right side above the Enter key, which temporarily disables the T-Splines interface and allows you to enter Rhino commands. In this case, we'll horribly misspell mirror. Oh, art school. Why will you let me down? All right, we're just going to use the Rhino mirror command. The third way to do it is to just hover in the command line. Right now, if I start typing with the heads-up display up, it's going to be looking for a T-Splines command. Whereas if I hover in the command line, I can type whatever I want. It's going to accept it. All right. So those 3 ways to kind of disable T-Splines so that you can get to your Rhino commands. So right now you can see that we've already essentially captured a considerable amount of volume as far as the shape of this car and what it's going to look like and all that kind of stuff. And at this point, all we're going to do is I'm just going to bridge them together. Just use the bridge command. And it's going to be symmetrical, and we're going to deal with symmetry later. Right now, when I bridge this together, I want to think about how many patches that I'm going to use between the two. If I bridge with one patch, I can do that, but I'm going to get a very flat transition between these two, and I'm not going to have any opportunity for adjusting the center line on this, which I'm going to need because if I go into my front view, if it's dead flat, that's no good. It needs to have a little bit of crown for aesthetics and strength and all that kind of stuff. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to double-click this edge. I'm going to double-click this edge as the edges that I'm going to bridge. I'm going to right-click to select. I'm going to change my segments here to 3. I'm going to just bridge that together. And it's going to give me a history here. Since I used the Rhino mirror command, it actually was using Rhino history on between the two here. And actually, you know what? I don't want that. I want 2 segments. Duh. Hang on. All right. I want 2 segments, not 3. There we go. Because this gives me a center line that I can then adjust to get my crown. Make sense? So let's go back into our side view. And I'm going to just pull this just a hair because I need to. All right. So I'm going to adjust these. Now, symmetry at this point is not even something that I'm going to worry about, because I'm going to show you the T-Spline symmetry tool in a little bit, and it's really awesome. So I'm going to just pull a few of these around to start kind of further defining my shape. I know you car guys out there, it's giving you chest pains watching me do this without symmetry on, but trust me, this is worth it. All right, and I'm going to exaggerate one side of it being really screwy. All right, so let's capture the front and rear end of this thing and get this buttoned up into a car shape. Now, if I switch to smooth mode, you'll notice that I don't necessarily get a smooth mode. Any ideas why that's happening? Well, there's a couple of things to check. First of all, we've got this here, so let's deal with those first, because that's obviously the single biggest reason for creases and weirdness going through your model. So I'm going to pick these 4 edges and these 4 edges. I'm going to bridge those together, because these are the edges that make up my side. These are the edges that make up my hood, so I'm going to keep those separate. I'm going to bridge along there, and I need to know how many edges I have. I've got 1, 2, 3, 4 edges, right? So I'm going to need 4 segments from one side to the other. And the edges are not lined up where they need to be, so I'm going to slide these out. I'm going to slide this one in a little bit. Same thing here. I can hear you out there dying over the symmetry of this thing. All right. Now, I need to close this up. There's 2 ways I can do it. I can pick these edges and merge edges. Let's go ahead and do that. And that sews that up. Now, one thing we want to check, make sure that anytime you do an operation like that, especially when you're getting started and it's really easy to make duplicate faces and all sorts of screwy stuff, that when you join 2 surfaces up like that, or two sets of patches up, select your verts and make sure that you've only got 1 vert there. If you had 2 verts here, then something joined but something didn't join, and the way to fix that is just to select it and hit the Z key or the weld verts button, and anything that's coincident on top of each other within file tolerance is going to stick together at that point, and you'll clear that up. So we'll weld the back so that you can see the 2 different ways of doing this. I'm going to control drag to deselect those. Same thing, just going to bridge back here, 4 edges, it should remember it. Again, I'm going to just slide this over. Hit the L key to get that loop. Turn my verts on, and if I pre-select them and hit the Z key, you'll notice they jump together. That may or may not be what I want. I think what I want is for this one to come here. So I'm going to pick it, hit the Z key, and then pick the next one, and you notice the first one jumps to the second one. I'm going to do the same thing here. Same thing here. Pick, Z, pick, and it jumps there. If I did it the other way around, if I said pick, Z, pick, that one jumps to there. If I pre-select them and hit Z, they jump together. But in this case, I want pick, Z, pick, or pick, vert, weld verts, like that. All right. So we've captured all the volume on this thing. Now it's time to revel in smooth mode, and there's creases all over the place. Anybody know what's going on? Well, first thing we want to check is to make sure that all of our verts actually did weld up. And in this case, they did. And the next thing we want to do is select the whole model and make sure that I don't have any extra faces or anything that it's super easy when you do the append face. And again, permit me to digress for just a second and talk about this, because this is a really common beginner problem. If I make a face and I grab an edge and I alt drag it to extrude it and I undo it, and then I Alt-drag to extrude it and undo it, and Alt-drag to extrude it and say, okay, that's what I want, and I turn my verts on, everything looks right, right? Look how many verts I have here. I've got 3. That's no good. The way to get rid of that is just to select those, hit the Z key. It'll weld anything that's coincident on top of each other, and I'm back to 1. If you have stacked verts like that aren't welded, it will throw a crease through your model. There's no way around it. So the way to do that is if you Alt-drag an edge and don't like where it is, undo it again. Because what happens is when you hit the Alt key and you click on this and drag, you've made a face. You can see it there. It's already started. The second thing you're doing is transforming it. There's 2 actions that are happening. So to get rid of it, you need to undo and then undo again, because now I've got 1 vert there. If I just Alt-drag, undo, and Alt-drag, I've got 2 verts there. Want it, but it's easy to fix. Just select everything, hit the Z key. Coincident verts will collapse within file tolerance. That still doesn't answer my issue of why this model has creases in it. Well, we've already determined that there's no outstanding verts because I selected the whole model and hit the Z key and my creases are still there. So the next thing I'm going to try is I'm going to go to the crease tool and I'm going to right click on it, which says select points to remove creases. I'm going to just drag select the whole model, right click to accept. Now it turns out when I did the bridge, since I bridged from one patch to the other, somewhere in there it didn't recognize that this should have been a smooth transition, and it left this entire edge or portions of this edge creased. And in order to get rid of that, all we had to do is run the remove crease command. Now, highlight nerds out there, if you're anything like me, this is the kind of stuff that you really like to see. You know, really just gorgeous, flat, laser-like highlights going through your model. And you get that because there was no chance of us introducing inflection because we laid it out flat and used the bend tool. So you're getting really gorgeous highlights throughout this entire model. How's everybody doing? All right, we still got everybody here? Any questions to this point? Feel free to shout because we can handle it before we jump in any further.
Yep. No, I think it's going great, Kyle. This marks about the halfway point in this webinar, and you can see already here Kyle's kind of got the basic shape of this car. Yeah, we might want to just speed up the tempo a little bit so we make sure we get to the same point that we got to with the other webinar.
You got it. So the next thing that we want to start dealing with is refining the shape a little bit. And right now it kind of looks like a bread loaf, and we don't want that. So I'm going to go into wireframe mode. Actually, go back to shaded mode for a second so make sure that I pick the right pieces. And I'm going to start dragging some edges in by going to my front view. Oops. And of course, I grabbed the ones that weren't laid out in the image, but that's all right. All right, this would be a great time to talk about symmetry because it allows me to be lazy and not have to go through picking the other side. In order to get symmetry on this model, you'll notice that we have a really asymmetrical model right now. And one of the coolest tools in T-Splines is actually the symmetry command. And it's up here in the modify menu, and if I click it, there's an option in here, axial, because it's a flat as opposed to radial. And we're going to discover it. And the first thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to pick the center line, and you'll notice that the model now snaps into symmetry. Well, the problem is it grabbed the wrong side. I actually wanted this side to be symmetrical. So instead of discovering off of an edge, I'm going to discover off of faces, and I'm going to pick this as a root, and this is the one I want to copy to. And you'll notice that by doing that, I said this is the side that I want to keep, this is the side that I want to match, and it snapped the model from one side to the other. The coolest thing about this is if you're working on a model like this, you can explore on one side, explore on the other side, and go back and forth and see which one you like better. And then the one that you like, you can just go ahead and discover the symmetry. Boom, you've got it. All right, so if we shade this, you can see we're starting to pull up beautiful shoulder, beautiful A-pillar highlight, beautiful C-pillar highlight. And we need to start tightening this up a little bit. So I need to add a little bit of detail, and let's go back to our side view here a little bit and just go to box mode and double check that everything is kind of lined up approximately where we want it to be. Go to the top view. I'm going to need a little bit of crown in this because cars aren't flat. So I'm going to throw a little bit of crown in here. I'm going to pull these 4 edges out. The cool thing is now that we have symmetry enabled, as I pull this, it adjusts on both sides. I'm going to bring this a little bit. Straighten that out. So a little crown here. I'm going to pull this point in a little bit to adjust where that A-pillar is falling. Adjust the top of the windshield a little bit. Now, I don't like how this is happening because windshields don't typically do that, so all I'm going to do is pull this forward so that that's happening a little more naturally. Slide that one back a little bit. Again, a little bit of crown in the back here. Pull these out. Since I've got symmetry on, I can just pull one side. And you're noticing that we're starting to get a nice car shape here. So let's go ahead and start adding some detail on this. And the first thing I want to do is add some detail so that I can start defining the cab a little bit more. So I'm going to pick this ring of edges. Instead of picking an edge like this and adding edges like that, I'm going to pick 2 edges and hit the K key, which picks all of these edges around here. And I'm going to insert an edge. I'm going to use simple right here. You'll notice that tightens up my cabin a lot. And I'm going to add another one up here. That gives me a lot more detail, a lot more definition, and stuff that I can work with later as we start working on this. This gives me the option to adjust the shoulder on this thing. So as I start pulling on this, let me go to TS Shiny here. You'll notice that I can get a step shoulder. All right, NURBS guys, you feeling me here? Check this out. You like that C-pillar transition right there? All right, but we'll deal more with that later. Let's look at the rear bumpers. So let me unshade this. And let's look a little bit at the rear end of this thing. And we may want to take an opportunity here just to do some quick adjustments. And again, if this was a NURBS model, this adjustment right here could possibly be an all-day thing. Whereas in T-Splines, we're just going to push it around. I don't know, maybe it goes like this. Maybe it goes like this. Can explore. All right, so I'm going to push this in to closer proximity to what I was looking at for the rear deck lid here. Pull that out a little bit. Grab that one, slide it in a little. Now you'll notice when I did this, I can use the straight up and down manipulator, I can use the straight left-right manipulator, or I can grab this disc up here and know that I'm not going in or out of the screen. I'm moving just within the plane of that particular point. It allows me to adjust that. And again, since symmetry's on, I know that those are lining up well. Straighten this out a little bit. Pull that a little bit here. Make that line transition nicely. All right, we'll break the front bumper later. All right. Now, you'll notice the way that this is set up, if I shade this again. I've got a nice flat body side here, but my shoulder needs to be a little higher. This needs to have a little bit more of a transition. So if we go into side view, what I can do is I can grab, these faces. I'm going to grab these. Not those. And I can pull these a little bit. I can grab this edge here. Not that one. And I can lift it just a hair. And you notice that my shoulder just came way up. That may be too high. Undo that. But I can adjust this highlight in real time to do what I want it to do by using the TS Shiny shader. Check that out. I can actually adjust exactly how I want that shoulder to fall on the fly and know that I'm going to get what I see is what I'm going to get.
So, Kyle, we talked about this last webinar, but how much of your time spent modeling with T-Splines is spent kind of tweaking control points at this stage?
Well, me personally, or like industry standard? Me personally, I'm an immense highlight nerd, and I will sit and I will sweat, you know, how a highlight peels in and out of something, you know, probably for longer than any human would really need to. But the coolest thing about T-Splines for me is the fact that you can watch all this stuff happen in real time. Like, say for instance, I wanted this shoulder to drop, you know, I can grab a couple of faces here and move it and just watch it, you know, watch it happen in real time. And so you can actually sit there and design with light while you're doing it, as opposed to trying to get a form that may or may not make the light do what you want. You can actually just sit there and play with the light until it does what you want it to do. And it makes you appreciate, you know, kind of the brilliance of whoever did the original models on like a Porsche 911, where you've got this gorgeous C-pillar highlight that wraps around the thing and then shoots off the back. You know, the fact that they essentially did that, you know, before all the benefits of modern CAD technology, you know, speaks volumes to how brilliant, you know, the people were who were working on a vehicle like that to get that kind of highlights. But, you know, we, with all the power that we have at our fingertips here, you know, you can actually just sit there and just push the light around until it does exactly what you want it to do. And that to me is just incredible. You know, you want your C-pillar to wrap in a little bit so that you get a zoom highlight there. You know, it's this simple. You just push this stuff in a little bit. And you can actually, you know, you can watch the highlights updates. So it's like you can just sit there and design the highlights to do exactly what you want. And that's awesome right there, to be able to do that. That seriously makes highlight nerds rejoice. But I'm getting ahead of myself a little bit. So let's look back at the bumpers. So to add the bumper in here, I've already got patches where I want them to be because I laid them out intelligently as I was doing it before. And so what I'm going to do is I'm just going to pick these faces and I'm going to duplicate them. And I had this pointed out to me before in the fact that this is kind of a two-step process to do essentially the same thing that you could do if you were extruding. The reason I like to do it this way is I like to duplicate the faces, I like to move them where I want them to be, and then I'll go back actually and delete the original faces. Oops. And I got a question as to why, why do it this way when you can just extrude these. I'll just hide that for a second. And the reason I like to do it this way, one, because I'm kind of simple-minded, and I really like the simplest possible approach to something. But the other thing is I like the option to be able to control whether or not I have a set of faces here. And in this case, what I want to do actually is I'm going to scale this just a little bit. I'm going to move my manipulator by hitting the T key and then shrink this a little bit. And basically what I'm doing is I'm creating a space where the bumper is going to be and where the bumper is going to transition. Now, there's a couple of ways that I can do this now. I could just weld this from here to here and have a little triangular patch right here, and that actually makes a fairly nice transition. But in my case, what that would do with a highlight, that would make kind of a wrapping highlight that's going to pinch here, and I don't want it to pinch. I want it to come and kind of just fade out real nicely. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to add an edge right here. And if you don't want to add an edge, you can also add a point, but in this case I'm going to add an edge right there. And symmetry is invoked, so it adds it on the other side too. And then what I'm going to do is I'm just going to weld this from here to here. Uh-oh. That's going to be a bummer. There we go. All right. Now would be a good time to save.
While you're saving that, Kyle, I just want to kind of chime in. We've hit about the hour mark of this webinar. We've got another 30 minutes ahead of us. But at this point, we're just curious to kind of get some of your feedback. If you want to use the chat box, what are your thoughts as far as what Kyle's been showing? What questions do you have? Is this pretty straightforward? Is this something that you can see yourself doing in your own industry with your own products? If you have any questions like that, now's the time to start asking those, and we can either type back answers or reserve some time at the end for Kyle to address those as well.
Cool. All right, so let's go ahead and join this up the rest of the way. Just going to pick Z because I want that one to jump to there. Pick Z. And I'm going to do the same thing over here. When something broke history or broke my symmetry in there, which is fine, I'm just going to weld this up real quick. And now, my bumper is going to sit a little bit proud of the rear end in top view. If I look at this, the tail is going to taper a little bit. So I'm going to just pick these two edges right now, slide these in a little bit, like that. Again, nice smooth transition that's happening here. And then I'm going to pick this edge and this edge, not all these other ones. And I'm just going to bridge. And in this case, I'm just going to bridge using one segment because I can always add more later. And that puts it all back together and gives me the ability now to start defining my bumper. Again, really gorgeous transitions are happening here. You know, if you look at this, if we zebra this thing, No. Come on, are you kidding me? You've got to love that. Highlights. All right. So to sharpen this up, all we have to do is add some edges in here, but we're going to save that till next time. All right, let's look at the front end. Again, through the magic of pre-planning, basically are already set up for where the bumper is going to go. In this case, I'm going to just slide this down a little bit so that it's really placed correctly. And we'll grab the whole front end. Are you starting to see how flexible and powerful this is for doing a complex object like a car? I mean, doing a front end like this is it's a lot of work, you know. And it's like here, it's really kind of not. I like to say it's kind of like bringing a knife fight. All right, so we're going to duplicate these guys off again. Again, I'm going to just pop this out a little bit because that's where I want them to be. And for the time being, I'm going to hide them. And then I'm going to pick these and just delete them. Now, at this point, I'm going to slide these back a little bit because that's a little closer to where I wanted my headlight line to be. Everything else is cool. Let's show this again. And I'm going to do the exact same thing I did before, which is to just insert an edge. Put it right about there. Same thing over here. Again, I'm not terribly concerned about whether or not they're symmetrical because we're going to just go back and discover history again. So I'm going to weld these two. I'm going to think for a second. Now, we made the mesh non-manifold, which is kind of why it's having a little bit of a tantrum here, but it will get itself figured out here in a second. Again, just pick, Z, pick, pick, Z, pick. Oops. Pick, Z, pick. There we go. Pick, Z, pick. And adjust this row here. Like that. Shade it so it's a little more obvious. And then we just bridge. Double click to select everything, control drag to deselect the ones that I don't want. Bridge. There we go. Now, if we toggle smooth, we should get a nice smooth front end. And good time to throw symmetry back on it. I'm just going to discover using the center line. Slaps it right back on there. And we're good to go. Now, let's look at our layout again real quick. Everything appears to be in order here. And if I TS shiny this thing, we are still getting nice highlights. There's a little something going on here, but I'm not worried about that because this is going to be taken out once we put the wheel openings in. But I do want to pull the nose in just a little bit so that, oh, you love that. Look at that. Because I want a little bit of a nice zing highlight right there. How much? Oh, is it that much or is it this much? Take that, NURBS. You can just totally adjust how that light's happening. Again, I'm working on a very kind of gross level right here, and the fact that I'm making, kind of big modifications. I'm not getting too worried about the nitty-gritty of this thing where I'm starting to look at, every little piece of it just yet. I probably do want to pull some of this back out because that is pulling under just a little bit. Too much. Again, you're designing in 3D. You're not just building. It gives you the power to go and make decisions where it affects a real actionable result, which I find really, really liberating. All right. So that's pretty much what we covered in the last webinar, and I don't want to jump too far ahead because I don't want to skip over stuff that we're going to cover in round 2 here, which is tomorrow. But we do have about 15 minutes left. If you guys want to throw some questions in, please feel free to do so, and we will deal with what you got here. Any thoughts so far?
Yeah, thank you very much, Kyle. And as we mentioned before, this will be recorded, and if you haven't signed up for parts 2 and 3, again, part 2 will be tomorrow, and you can sign up for that just on our homepage, T-Splines.com. See, it looks like there have been a number of questions that we've answered over the chat already. And we can just stay here for a few more minutes to see if any other questions pop up. So it seems like this crowd was actually pretty experienced in T-Splines modeling. So I am curious, is this the way that, do you model like this when you're making T-Splines products? Do you have a completely different workflow that you like to follow? Is there anything in particular that stood out today that was useful? Yeah, just another question from Steve about if we are recording this. Again, we are recording it. Hopefully it works this time. We tried recording it last week and it didn't work. So assuming everything goes all right, then this should get up on the T-Splines site in the next couple of days, and you will be sent an email for that. Here's one question about whether that layout drawing is available. I haven't asked Kyle that. What do you think, Kyle?
I'd be happy to sell it for, I don't know, $50,000, $60,000. No, you can absolutely no. You certainly can have that.
Okay, well, good. Well, that will be a valuable piece as well. We can put that on with the webinar as well.
Show again how to remove the creases after bringing the sides to create the body. Let me answer that by throwing a crease on it. If I crease this, you'll notice that all sorts of really ugly stuff happens through this thing. Well, actually, it's not that ugly because it was so expertly laid out. But if you want to get rid of a crease, basically what you need to do is turn on the points. In this case, I wanted to get rid of the crease that went through the whole model, so I'm going to select all of the points, and I'm going to right-click instead of left-click on the crease button. And for some reason, my tooltips are not showing up. But if you hover over this, you'll see left mouse is make crease, right mouse is get rid of crease. Just right mouse on that, and you'll notice that the crease has disappeared. Any other questions?
So here's one question, Kyle. How? Yeah, go ahead and answer that. The question about how to map UV coordinates once the model is complete to T-Splines models.
You know what I do actually is I don't render any T-Splines objects. I always, and it's just because I'm old and crabby and lazy and don't want to learn anything new. I convert them into NURBS models, and then I just do, typically like the same kind of stuff that I would do there, or convert it into a mesh and either UV map it in ZBrush or whatever you like to UV map in.
Could you show just how you convert a T-Splines model to NURBS surfaces, Kyle?
I don't know if we have enough time for that, Matt.
We can make time today, yeah.
Can we make some time? Okay.
Yep.
All right, here we go. It's a long, drawn-out process, and you right-click on this button here, and you click on the model, and it's NURBS. Did we go over?
I think that was fine. Yep.
Think we're good? Okay. All right. This is now a NURBS polysurface. You can trim this. You can boolean it, and cap it. You can do whatever you want to do. It is a NURBS surface Rhino model that you've always known and loved. Single button click. Now, the downside is you can't go back. You can't undo it. So what I do when I do convert to NURBS, and this, I alluded to this earlier, when I do convert to NURBS, or I know I'm going to convert to NURBS, I will copy the original T-Splines model onto a separate layer, or even better, I will actually save it out as a piece of clip art. And the cool thing about doing that is next time I have to design a sedan, I'll bring this in at this level, and I've already got the model laid out, pretty much the way it needs to be. And if it's a long sedan, then I make a long sedan, and if it's a sports coupe, then you have a lot of options there. So it allows you to very, very quickly, if you establish essentially a library of these things, which I do. I have a library. I have a sedan, kind of in about this far, maybe a little bit farther, but I have a sedan like this. I have a pickup truck like this. I have like a tractor trailer, cab. I have a sports car. I have a whole bunch of these things, like 4 or 5 or 6 of these things laid out that that the next car model I get, assigned to me, I'll look at which one it is. I'll bring the control art in just like this, and then basically it's just a simple matter of going in and just pushing the points around. It's like, because it's already laid out, it's already pretty much ready to roll, and so then it's just a matter of going in and squishing the thing around to match. And I find that it's not taking hours out of my workflow, it's taking days out of my workflow. And so something that I was charging for in the past, and it was taking X amount of days, I'm actually clipping out days of this. And in my business, I bill by the job, not by the hour. And so the idea being that there's incentive for me to work faster and smarter because I make more money, and then the client knows what they're paying up front, and blah, 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 blah. So my whole incentive and my whole trip as far as using digital tools is to figure out ways to become more profitable. And one of the ways that T-Splines has significantly increased my profitability is to be able to lay stuff out, and I have a clip art, file of stuff that I can bring in. I have a basic telephone, I have a basic pair of scissors, I have a basic pen, I have a basic camera, I have 4 or 5 different cars, I have all the stuff that I can use that saves me the original hour of sitting down and laying it out and trying to figure out how to make it work. So I would highly encourage you guys to do the same thing. It's a massive boost in productivity, and it's something that I think will make you considerably more valuable in the positions that you're in.
So, Kyle, there's a few more questions here. Just as people start leaving the webinar, we do have a survey that will pop up when you leave the webinar. If you could just take a couple minutes to answer those questions, that will help us to improve these webinars in the future, and we appreciate that. Here's a question from Steve. Will there be some dynamic sections or highlights in the body side in upcoming demos to show the power of T-Splines?
Yeah, absolutely. You know, we can, I mean, you can model with the zebra on. If I turn the zebra on, you can model with this on, and you can actually push and pull highlights back and forth. So is that CCS, Steve Jens? So as you go through this, you can actually adjust this stuff real time with the zebra on. You can also do this with the draft analysis. Hey, Steve, how are you doing? Thanks for coming. So you can pull this stuff around, you know, in real time and actually watch your highlights and watch your flow lines update as you go, which is just as you awesome.
So, and here's another question that we typed back a response to, but just be interested to hear your thoughts on it, Kyle. How would you go about modeling a rear wing on an existing car body, or how do you get the real trunk into Rhino accurately enough to design the wing for it?
You know, Sky Greenwald, if you look at some of the demos that he did for some of the airplane webinars that he did, he actually uses a ferro arm to go in and pull points, and then he'll build a surface through those points and then build a part that matches up with it. And the idea being, you know, any way that you could scan the data, and if you're building off an existing part, at some point you're going to be using scan data one way or the other anyways. And so however that scan data comes in, however you want to reverse engineer that to get your starting surface, do that process. You know, Rhino's super flexible as far as it can bring in an OBJ, it can bring in an IGES, you can bring in, you know, you can bring in a point cloud, you can do all that kind of stuff however you want to do it. And so I would either use a ferro arm and pick enough points that you could build the surface that you're building off of, or, you know, quite honestly, if someone was paying me to do that, I would rent them an Ulta scanner, you know, a red light laser scanner, and I would do like a full-blown scan of the rear trunk, have the thing in there, so I knew that I was dealing with the exact holes and the exact position and all that kind of stuff, and then just build your T-Splines part off of it, and then use the reverse engineered surface to Boolean out of what you finished making, and you know, it should fit like lasers. So
here's just a couple technical questions, Kyle. Could you show how to use flatten points or the set point command?
Yeah. Let me shut this off. All right. So say, for instance, I wanted the bottom of this thing to be dead flat. I'm going to pick an edge, hit the L key, and I can use the Rhino set point command. Again, since T-Splines is up and running, I'm going to hover in the command line, which temporarily disables the T-Splines commands. And I'm going to just type set point, set PT. Oops, not September, set PT. There we go. Hit OK, and I'm going to just set these in the Z, and boom, flattens it right out. I use this all the time. This is like, say for instance, this isoparam right here. See how it's gotten a little wonky? I will set points on this and flatten it so that I know it's dead flat, and then I will go and bend. Well, actually, that didn't flatten out, did it? Come on. Alrighty, you. All right, set point. For some reason, that is misbehaving. All right. Imagine, if you will, that worked. Let's look at the bottom here. And so what I'll do is I'll use that to flatten it back out, and then I'll go back and use the Rhino bend tool on the points to put it back into shape. And that way you know that you're getting nice, smooth transitions. So if I grab all these points, set my point to there, use my scale, I can flatten those out again. And then bend it back with my. All right, so it did actually flatten out in the box mode. So I'm not a complete idiot. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to rotate that just and then go to my points, go to my bend, place them using the bend tool. Okay? I use that trick all the time. I love that trick. Like I said, I stole it from Juan and I claim it as my own, so don't tell him.
So Kyle, here's a question from Steve Bond, and you can decide whether you want to show this now or in the next webinar, but could you show how you would create a concave crease like on the wing of a BMW?
Like on the deck lid, is that what you're talking about? Like the one that's stamped into the deck lid, or are you talking about like an actual separate wing? Because it would be two different things. If you're doing it with, if you're doing it on the deck lid, you would want to make sure that you had enough geometry in here. So I would need to add an edge here, and I need to add an edge across. And then what I would do is push that down a little bit, and then crease just the center edge, and then let it fade out. And we'll talk about that. Concave surface which blends into a concave shape. Hey Steve, I don't know if you're coming to the next webinar or not, but if you want to email me like a 2-second sketch or something like that, I'll be happy to look at that offline and shoot you a note on that. I think I understand what you're talking about, but I want to make sure that I'm not just wandering around in the weeds. So, so go ahead and my email is either kyle@tsplines.com or kyle@theoutside.biz, and feel free to just shoot me a little sketch, and either myself or Juan or one of the other guys will put together something for you so you can see exactly what you're talking about. I don't want to waste your time watching me demo something that you're not interested in. So.
Cool. Well, good. Well,
anything else?
Looks like that's most of the questions. So. Kyle, thanks a lot for doing this today. It was just as good the second time as the first time.
I need a little better the second time.
And thanks everyone for coming. And again, we hope to see you all tomorrow.
Excellent. Thanks for coming, everybody.